Well, welcome. I hope you were well and thank you for joining again. I would like to expand on a conversation that I began in yesterday's session, in which I talked about the importance of good communication in relationships, but more importantly, the responsibility that we have as men to be good communicators and to be good leaders in a relationship. Good communicators at the start of the relationship, during the relationship, and even if the relationship for some reason is to come to an end, how we must continue to be good communicators all the way through till the end. Now, towards the end of yesterday's session, I made reference to the importance that our group plays and the role that they play in our respective lives. And I made reference to how traditionally we are familiar with the reference that is often made in the modern West, which states that it takes a village to raise a child. Now, the reason I make reference to the modern West is because in most parts of the West, most people are no longer growing up in villages or small towns, and instead we find ourselves growing up in cities and larger communities of people who we do not know and who we have no obligation to. Let me connect that conversation towards the end of last night's session with today's theme, which I'd like to expand on. Now, I subsequently, at the gym, overheard a young girl speaking. I was wearing my headphones, as most people usually do when they exercise, but I could hear someone speak very loudly. My initial reaction normally is to make sure that perhaps someone is not in any form of confrontation with another person. That was my initial feeling. So I took off my headphones and I looked around and I noticed the girl who was speaking. Initially, I thought perhaps it was a confrontation. Her voice was very loud. As I listened for a few seconds, obviously to see whether everything was okay with her, my observation was that she was providing advice to a friend of hers with regards to her friend's relationship. And I realized that what I was trying to share before I went to the gym and what I had observed in the gym were connected. Let me expand on that in today's session, and I hope the message comes across as clearly as I would like. For some reason, in the West, we have rejected the traditional ways of dating or interacting between men and women. We felt for some reason that the traditional ways of dating was perhaps not right, and that we had to evolve and become more liberal and more open, and that the individual was responsible for the most important decisions, which was about picking or choosing your spouse or your partner or whoever you spend time with, and that the rest of your community, your friends or family, played very little part in that process. We have found, and this is my observation, that there was some wisdom from the old ways, although there's a good position that one can take about the importance of the modern ways. In any case, the group that we have is very important. The importance of the group can be observed, especially if you look at the animal kingdom. Before coming to human beings, if you observe the animal kingdom, what you find, generally speaking, is that amongst the young male of the species, they always congregate around the older males of the species because they learn how to hunt, how to fight, how to protect from the older men. Similarly, amongst the women or the female of the species, the younger ones congregate around the older ones because they have to learn from the older ones. But amongst two groups, what you find is a divergence over time. Young male species learn from the older male until they get to a point where they become independent. And they, I guess, choose their own path. It's not unusual to find that most of the men tend to hunt as individuals, as opposed to in groups, generally speaking. The women, on the other hand, even though when the women have matured to be of a certain age, they still stay within the group. Women need the group much more than men need the group for various reasons. One particularly is survival. If you stay with the group and the pack, the chances that you will be eaten by the lions is much smaller. If you veer away and choose a different path and be a lone ranger, the chances that you will come across some harm is much higher. Men by nature, or the male of the species by nature, accepts that reality. And so it's not unusual to find that the male of the species dies at a much faster rate and speed compared to the female of the species. Human beings, we do the same thing. A young boy starts within the group of men, and if he learns properly, at some point, he leaves the pack. It's important for him to still remain close to the pack, but still have his independence and autonomy. Women, on the other hand, as they grow, need to have a group, a close community of other women, for their survival, for their nourishment, for their well-being, because survival is dependent on the group for women, whereas survival is not necessarily dependent on the group for men. Now, I've gone through this long explanation to expand on how we as human beings, and as men and women, need to understand the importance of the group. And intersexual dynamics, when dating, whether you're in the marketplace looking for long-term commitment, or whether you are in the marketplace looking for short-term fun, the necessity to be able to make the right decisions is very important. One bad decision can, I guess, derail and rob you of your potential and the future you have as a person. I use the example that men are born with potential. Every day we have to work hard to convert that potential to results. That's all we get, potential. We have to convert it to results. So our value is intrinsically hidden in whether we put to work the gifts that we've been given. It's not inherent in us in many respects. So as a man grows and gets older, his value increases if he maximizes the opportunities put before him. And therefore, the opportunity to make mistakes at a younger age has much lower consequences for men. Although, if he makes bad mistakes, he robs himself of all of that value that he might gain in the future. Women have an inverse approach. A woman, fundamentally speaking, in the dating marketplace, her value is given to her inherently. Beauty, youth, fertility, chastity, femininity. These are things that men want in a woman. And therefore, as she ages, sadly, there is a depreciation in that value over time, just based on what men want, generally speaking. Whereas for a man, our ability to provide and protect increases up to a certain point, especially with regards to protection. But for provision, as we age, our ability to provide increases. The value we have as men increases. So for a woman particularly, the importance of making sure that you get the early decisions correctly and to be on the right path is more critical. The group plays a huge part early stage because your value is given to you, and in many ways it's the same as someone winning the lottery. If you don't have the right structure, frame, morals, ethics, character, principles, you might find that being given too much money at once causes you to make very poor decisions that ensures that your future is sacrificed at the expense of your present. So for women, generally speaking, the importance of the group and the importance of having good people in the group to help vet and choose the important decisions of your life carefully is highly critical. Now, between men and women, we generally, as a society, believe that the spouse or the person we choose as a long-term partner, generally speaking, is one of the most important decisions that we will make. When we choose to invest our money or take debt to buy a house, that also is an important decision. Our career choices are important decisions. But amongst all those three, your lifetime partner is considered the most important decision you make. So it has to be made carefully, with careful consideration. And sadly, your ability to make that decision impartially or without bias or independently is minimized the younger you are compared to the older you are. So for example, let me make it more practical. A young man who is 23 has not gained the level of wisdom, experience needed to be able to make long-term decisions at age 23. If you consider that you've been emancipated at, say, age 18, but most people tend to still live with mom and dad until 23, even if they're still, they're attending university or college. So most young people, men especially at 23, are still very immature. It's a natural process. For women, the same principle applies. A woman who's 23 obviously is not as emotionally mature, mentally capable as perhaps a 10-year version of herself. The same principles apply with both men and women. So how we make decisions is something that we have to consider very carefully. The younger you are, the more you need the group. Now that group might consist of your parents, your relatives, your friends, or your community. Now let me explain to you how this plays a role in dating. Most people make decisions on who they find attractive based on a feeling. Who we find attractive is usually sometimes visual or auditory, or a combination of both. At which point, once we get to know them, we then factor in other parts of their unique attributes, temperament, character, and the rest. But generally speaking, it's a feeling. When people fall in love, it's an emotional feeling. We give too much and we pay too much respect to love. Love is a feeling. Unfortunately, it's the wrong feeling that you need to use to make long-term decisions on a spouse, for several reasons. But let me give you one reason. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to either watch a film or listen to maybe a well-narrated documentary or conversation, or if you've observed in person something like a beautiful piece of music, an orchestra singing, and found yourself in tears. Music can change how you feel. Images can change how you feel. Words can change how you feel. Said rightly or said poorly, all of those can change your emotions. Our feelings are very easily manipulated. As an individual, as an adult, you have to understand that that is a truism across all people. We can watch a film that we understand to be fictional and still find ourselves in tears. And we even hold ourselves back and say, I don't understand why I am crying, because I know this is a fictional account of a story. Your feelings can be easily manipulated. And so, in making decisions that are long-term, have a long-term necessity, and with the future in mind, you can't use your feelings, especially the feeling of love. If you are in a relationship seeking to choose someone on a permanent long-term basis, the importance of bringing in the group is highly critical, because the group can be objective, non-emotional, one or two steps separated from you, and therefore more logical, therefore able to see things that you may not be able to see. And let me use a good example to illustrate how this works. Last year, we heard about the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard lawsuit. Something happened in that lawsuit, as generally occurs in many legal cases. There were witnesses that were brought on to speak on both parties, either a witness supporting the claimant or a witness supporting the defendant. One of the things we saw were character witnesses, people coming and speaking to the character of either party to say, I've known Johnny for 15 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, and this is who he is. But we also saw a cross-examination of other people saying, I've also known Johnny, and in the period I knew Johnny, I also saw something different. Someone who perhaps was not very patient, someone who was temperamentally unstable. What you found was both parties and their witnesses were providing information to enable the jury come to a conclusion about the characters of both the defendants and the claimants. Now let me substitute Johnny Depp and Amber Heard with two people in love, a young man and a young woman. The young woman says, I've met someone who I want to get married to. And let's, in this case, assume he has already proposed. She brings him to, assuming it's done properly, she brings him to meet her parents, her family, her community, or her group very early in the relationship, not waiting too late. And it's the same as bringing someone to be on trial. The experience of a trial is so important in relationships. Now, in the dating marketplace, which is short term, you may not need all of that. Men generally are in the dating marketplace for sex. Women these days for the same outcomes. In the relationship marketplace, people are looking for something more substantive, something more long-term. Exclusivity, a mono relationship, potential marriage, cohabitation, possibly choosing a lifetime partner. And so the process we use in the trial example is different. For men, generally speaking, in the dating marketplace, all we care about is, would she accept me? Now, for men, generally speaking, men will mate across and downwards, both on socioeconomic level, but also on physical attributes. Men have very little or very low yardsticks for choosing people who they mate with. Women are slightly more selective, and rightly so. When it comes to marriage or long-term relationships, we can learn from legal cases of how trials are conducted. And here is perhaps what I would suggest. At the early stage of any relationship, once you've gone past the phase where you think this is beyond 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I'm starting to spend more time with the person, and I can see myself with the person long term, you have to bring the person in for trial. It doesn't sound like a very romantic thing to do, but it's necessary. And I should explain why. The one currency we have, and we are all given equally, is time. 24 hours every day. Now, the duration, what I call vertical time and horizontal time. Vertical time is 24 hours in a day. It's all you have in one simple day. We get the same. Horizontal time, we do not all get the same. Some people, unfortunately, are gifted with longer life, and some people have shorter lives. But we have the same hours every day. So we have equality if we wake up every day. Now, some of us may not end the day, but generally speaking, we have 24 hours, assuming we complete one day. The trial process simply means, once you've decided that this potentially could be something long-term, to allow other people who care about you, who are more experienced than you, to look to the character of the individual that you might be spending a significant portion of your life with. Now, let me perhaps share the importance of this for women, particularly. Generally speaking, beauty lasts about 12 years, 12, 13 years. 18, which is when a woman is emancipated, up to about 30. And then there's a very steep decline. It deteriorates so fast. But it continues from 30 to about 35. And then it fizzles away very, very fast, even more so. But generally speaking, beauty has a sustaining lifetime, which is about 12 years, 18 to 30. Now, what this simply means is, if you add the 12 years and take into account, for most people who want to get married, the purpose of marriage, which is to procreate, a woman ideally should make the early decisions about long-term partnership as early as possible, because nature unfortunately doesn't give most women or all women the same time frame that it gives men. That's just a double standard in how nature deals its cards. What that simply means is that every single year between 18 and 30, you are losing 8% or 8.3% of your dating life, all things remaining equal. 1/12 is 8.3%. So every year that goes by, 8.3% of your dating life by experience and by decision making. In other words, ideally you want to know who you will be spending the rest of your life with by 30. Yes, that decision can be made later, but it should be made early as possible. And the more you delay, the more time, the less time you have left. So one of the reasons of starting the trial process early is to ensure that you do not take a significant part of your most important years and gift it to the wrong person. So it's not unusual to find that most women might date the same person for 5 years. Now 5 years, say between age 20 and 25, 5 years would be the same as almost 40% of your peak beauty years. And if at the end of the 5 years, you learn that perhaps the relationship is not for both of you, or the relationship comes to a swift end, you've invested almost 40% of the most important years of your sexual marketplace value and your reproductive fertility value in someone that should not have been deserving of that time. Now, interestingly, a man who is 20 could invest 5 years, and at 25, if he decides this was not for me, he has not lost the same value as a woman, because the more he ages and as he gets older, he has more of what women find attractive, because his ability to earn more and produce more increases. So for women particularly, it's important to bring people in very early for a review, for a trial. And here is perhaps some ideas to keep in mind. When a woman brings a man in for a trial by the various groups that she has close to her heart, and there should be different groups. There should be your family, including the extended family. Let me expand on this slightly. All of us have different levels of association in our lives. We have an inner circle, an outer circle, sometimes even a further outer circle. In our inner circle, we might have people who we hold very close to our hearts. It could be family, it could be friends. In our outer circle, it could be family, it could be friends. As part of the experience of a trial, you should not limit the process to those in your inner circle alone. You see, because family members and friends, generally speaking, tend to love you just the way you are and will be there for you, irrespective of the mistakes you make. They'll cry with you when the need for that is required, and they'll support you when the need for that is required. But very few of them would risk the relationship in order to ensure that you're discerning in your decision-making process. Very few people will say, no, I think you're making the wrong decision. They generally will try not to rock the boat. So people will go along. Those who are slightly disconnected from you, who are in your outer circle, have less to invest or less to lose, because they're not so close to you. Therefore, they can be very blunt. They can be direct. Now, if you have someone in your inner circle who can be as blunt as is needed, then that's a gift. Young girls, generally speaking, do not trust the wisdom of their parents. They call parents old-fashioned. They get upset if parents say, listen, I'm not too happy with the young man you brought forward. And so parents will go along just to avoid losing the child or the love from the child. So it's important to understand that you need different groups. There should be your family, your close family members, and even your extended family. There should be your friends. And even if you can, there should be other groups where you can allow the person to be, I guess, interviewed by, such as perhaps if you're a member of a sports club, your sensei, your teacher, a deacon in your church, a priest, your rabbi. These are people who are disconnected from you but still play a role in your lives. For them to interview the young man or the old man and identify things that they have observed, and they can present that to you, because your emotions can be very easily manipulated. Like I said, feelings are changeable. It's possible to see a beautiful woman and suddenly, or a beautiful man, and get sexually aroused. It's possible to see a beautiful picture of a steak and get hungry. It's possible to see a photo of a young child suffering, or a dog, an animal suffering, and feel sad. Your feelings can be easily manipulated. And when people come to relationships, generally speaking, there is an art of deception that takes place where both parties are not aware, but they're putting their best foot forward. You know, I've met a woman, I like her so much, and I want her to choose me. It's a signaling process. I put away all of my bad habits with the hope that I can be joined with her long enough for her to overlook my bad habits. But sometimes the bad habits can be like the iceberg principle: 1/7 on the up, which is good, and 6/7, which is poor, which is bad. So the people around your group are given the opportunity to go deep down and see how deep the iceberg is, and what behaviors and mannerisms and history they might have, to ensure that you are not making a poor decision as a young woman, or vice versa. So my observation has been that, and this is perhaps an interesting observation, audit yourself and ask yourself the question: how many groups do I have, and who are the people in that group who can do the review process for me, because I'm too emotionally involved with this person, and therefore I cannot be objective. I cannot be disconnected, and therefore I cannot be sincere to myself. But these people are good people. They have my best intentions at heart, and therefore they can be objective, they can be direct, they can be sincere, they can still come in good faith, but tell me what needs to be heard. And I can accept or reject what they have told me. Now, let's go back to time. You spend 5 years of your life with one person, and the relationship ends. You've lost 5 years. As a woman, up to 35, which is high risk pregnancy, between 18 and 35, you have 18 years. That is not a lot of time. Typically speaking, it means every year you lose about 6%. So if you're the kind of person who wants to have a family, you have 18 years to get those decisions correctly. If you date someone for 10 years, it simply means that you've dated them for close to 65% of your fertile, safe, fertile years. And if at the end of that 10-year process, both of you walk away, and let's just assume you're 36 at the time when you decide to stop the relationship, it means your chances of reproducing is much lower than it would have been when you were 20. You've lost 60% of your prime reproductive fertility value. Now, let me alter that slightly, because I made a wrong statement. At 35 or 36, you've lost probably about 90% of your reproductive fertility value. If the person or the two parties in question do not want to have kids, then yes, the reproductive fertility value plays a much less role because both of you do not want to have kids. It's then about your sexual marketplace value, meaning would other men find you attractive enough to commit to you? So it's important to bring people to the stand, the trial stand, and make sure that they vet your decision carefully. I was going to give you an example. I said, firstly, audit yourself and ask yourself, are you blessed with the right people and the right quantity of people in each group? The more groups you have, the better, which means the more groups you can bring the person to for other people to observe them and decide on your behalf whether you are making a sane, rational, long-term decision that is consistent with your best interests. Here is my background and my experience. When I was growing up, I found that I don't know about you, but I found in my experience, the whole idea that it takes a village to raise a child is something I relate to. I could make mistakes outside, and I would have other men and women reprimand me, discipline me, bring me back home, tell my parents what I had done poorly. My parents will thank them very, very graciously, and then reprimand me again. In other words, I understood how I could not bring embarrassment or disgrace to the family. I felt as though I was part of an extended family. And therefore, my behavior was regulated by the fact that I wasn't just away from the presence of my father or mother. It felt as though I had a hovering presence of my parents, a watchful eyes, big brother, people looking over me. But here's the important point. For my best interest, they were not keeping count of my movements because they hated me. They always wanted the best for me. Now, this resulted in a lot more, less, I would say, at the early stages of my life, making decisions that would embarrass less of the decisions that would embarrass my parents or my community, because I was part of the community. In the West, especially if you've been raised or if you live in a major city, that relationship doesn't exist. We're very individualistic. We have our tribes, our groups, and everybody else. So I have found, in my experience, that my closest friends, even those who should know better as my friends, I have found they've also adopted the idea that they are capable of making the decisions relationally themselves. Now, I have had friends who 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the line, I have ended up saying things that I knew that I said at the early stage. Like I believe it's a moral duty and a responsibility those to who you love to be honest. And if you have the opportunity to identify things that you know could hurt them, despite their emotional state in the present, and to tell them what you find. But I've found, generally speaking, most people in the West make selective decisions alone. In almost all instances, yes, there are exceptions, such decisions are poor decisions over the long term. Most people will not say anything because they're worried about falling out with the loved ones, or because they do not want to lose a friendship. Usually it takes a short few years for people to come back to the realization that they should have been more outspoken. So in your particular life, I'd like you to do something, audit your relationships, your groups, and see how many people you have in each group who are, I guess, worthy of being in your corner to edit and to critique whoever you brought forward as a partner, a boyfriend, a potential husband. let me go back to the conversation I started with about the gym. The young girl in the gym, when I overheard her speak, she's fairly young, very early 20s, she was giving advice to another friend. I listened for a few seconds. And what I noticed, I made two observations. Number one was, here is a good friend. Because the advice she was giving was very strategic. Now, I tuned out after a few seconds because it wasn't a conversation that I was supposed to be part of. But I was grateful that she had someone in her corner telling her what to do. Someone who loved her enough to tell her the truth. To say, listen, I think you should take the following steps. So she has someone in one group. But I thought to myself, well, does she also have family members and other groups that are critiquing? Now, at the core of their conversation, the girl speaking in the gym was giving her friend advice on how to break up with her boyfriend. It was very firm. She explained how to do it in person, provided how she should explain why the breakup was necessary, and the steps she should take once she had actually passed that feedback to the person, and how to remain sure, to ensure that she stayed firm on that decision without being drawn back into the relationship that she wanted to walk away from. That's a good friend. But I thought to myself, I hope she also has a father and a mother and family members who are wise enough and who have good judgment and who are discerning, who had met the boy in question and who had told her at an early stage, baby, this is what we see, so that she didn't have to waste so many years to then start again. That is at the core, the message that I have today. Now let me share with you a personal experience. At several stages of my life, I have had the opportunity to meet friends of women I have dated, to meet family members of women I have dated, to meet the extended groups of the people I have dated, partly because I've always asked to meet those people. If you show me half a dozen of the most important people who influence your life, either by their words, their actions, or their past, I can predict with some level of accuracy as to what your decision-making ability and therefore trajectory could be in the short term. So I'm always interested in meeting the parents if it's a relationship that I want to progress. I'm always interested in meeting the friends if it's a relationship I want to progress forward. I'm always interested in meeting the extended group if it's a relationship I want to progress. The reason being, I want to be critiqued. There might be things, perhaps, that I cannot see, that other people see about me. And I want her to be aware of what those things are. It doesn't have to be brought to my attention, but I understand the power of being emotionally involved with someone. And sometimes a woman might say, well, I don't care what other people think about you. I think you're a great man. Wrong. That's the wrong thing to say. You have to listen to the voice of what we call the elders, if you have the opportunity for that. And I have had opportunities where there's been feedback, and the feedback has not been necessarily positive towards me. And I have had to sit down with the lady in question and say, you have to listen to what they have said. Now, I'm not questioning necessarily their intentions. I'm not questioning whether they came to the table in good faith. I'm not questioning whether there is an ulterior motive. I'm not even questioning whether their conclusions are correct. I'm simply saying you should listen to what they have said and be dispassionate about your involvement with me. Take the feedback, go through the feedback, and let that feedback feed into your overall system of decision making. Now, in business, I give recommendations as follows. If you're looking to buy a property, Take a piece of paper, on one page, write down all of the reasons why you should buy that property. On another page, write down all of the reasons why you should not buy the property. Combine both pages. Generally speaking, done objectively, your decision-making process should be a lot more clearer because you have both the pros and the cons. If you're buying a company, the same principle applies. If you're investing money in stocks or bonds or alternative assets, commodities, currencies, collectibles, the same process applies. You have to be able to argue both sides. I grew up with a knowledge of how to be in a debate team. I've used this example several times that I don't know about you, but if you go back when we had good debate societies and good debate teams, the debate coach gave you a topic to study. You were never told at the start whether you would be debating for or against the topic. It means you have to be dispassionate in your analysis. But you had to prepare. Just before the debate was about to start, you were assigned a side. And then you had to put forward the best case for the side you had been selected to represent. The key reason for that process was to ensure that you could argue just as well for a position that you disagreed with as you could for a position that you agreed with. The reason being that you haven't qualified to debate another person, except you can argue their position just as well as they can. Now, in relationships, it's the same thing. Before you choose someone and conclude and decide to invest, now usually when people decide, they don't say I'm going to be with this person for 5 years. They simply hope. But hope is not a strategy. You need a strategy. And you need to be dispassionate in your analysis. So you should be able to argue for him, if you are a woman, because you already know the good qualities he has that you've seen. But you don't know all of the poor qualities that he might have, because most men conceal their qualities that are bad. So you need other people to use inferences, questions, by being curious, inquisitive, probing. Sometimes perhaps stepping too far in asking questions to draw out the argument for the opposite side. So you have 2 pages of pros and cons, and if you combine both, it may not give you the answers that you need immediately, but it would help you contain your biases so that you can say, well, perhaps, just perhaps, I could be wrong. And that's all you need. Generally speaking, all you need is that acknowledgement that you could be wrong. And therefore, you can ask yourself a follow-up question. What steps should I take to ensure that I am not hurt? I do not waste my time and my years. I do not lose my sexual marketplace value, my reproductive fertility value for someone who is not deserving of me. Now, a very simple way of thinking about dating and life. Now, I hope all of that has been useful. And let me leave you with one conclusion. Sometimes you might go through all of the steps that I have suggested, and you might find that things do not work out in the utopian way that I have explained. But let me suggest a few things, because sometimes you need ways of understanding whether the review process has been done correctly. I go back to the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp case. What was fascinating about the case was that the case was televised. And so people could watch in real time the quality of the questions that were being asked by each party and their teams. Johnny's team had structured their questions very carefully, and Amber's team had structured their questions very carefully. The jury were only there to listen to both parties. I'm going to place you as part of the jury if you are a woman or a man. One of the ways that you would know whether the right questions are being asked by your team would be the following. Now, let me share an example of a bad question. Generally speaking, you take a boy back to see your mum or to meet your friend or loved ones, and they ask, where did you meet? Or how long have you been dating each other? These are wrong questions. The way you know and how you know that the right questions are being asked are as follows. Are the questions probing? Do they draw out discomfort from your man or your woman? Do they cause them to stop and pause and think? Does his body language or her body language change? Do they appear to be more thoughtful in how they respond? Now, some of the questions, rather than ask, where did you meet? Or where did he propose? No, a simple alternative could be, of all the women you had dated before you met her, what qualities did she and attributes did you see in her that made her unique to the other women that you had dated? Now, this question is a loaded question because what you're trying to do is draw out what he sees in her. Because if all women have the same qualities as she does, and attributes and personality as she does, then it means she's not special in his eyes. It means his emotions, the feelings, at the right time will fade. There has to be something. There has to be something he sees in her that it makes her unique to other women. There has to be something unique. Rather than ask questions such as, where did he propose? You should be asking questions such as, have you considered the possibility that this relationship will fail? And if so, what steps would you promise us or take to ensure that there is enough time for both parties to resolve the issue before you call it quits? You're making the boy be more responsible. You're simply saying, well, you can't just exit this relationship having wasted her best years whenever you want. People come and give you invitations to weddings and say, this is the date, this is the menu, tell us what you would like to eat amongst what we've offered. Mistake that is often made is, on the same invitation should be a note that says, keep this invitation, because when we decide to dissolve the relationship, we want you to be present when we sign those documents that says we no longer want to be together. You see, that alters the way men think, because in effect you're bringing the man forward and you're making him responsible. You're simply saying it's much easier to pull down than it is to build up. And especially for women, they lose their value much earlier than men. And we want to preserve the woman's value, and therefore we want to make sure that the man has thought through the whole process, the whole cycle of life, before he starts the journey. Begin with the end in mind. Now, I conclude with the following, and this is where the wisdom of the traditional ways of relationships was useful. Back in the day, we lived in communities. So, if I came to my father and I said, I met a woman and she is a daughter of this particular family, you might find that my father goes to his friends and says to his friend, well, my son says he's seen a woman he likes. What do you know of their family? It's not about the woman. It's about the family. So we go back to the books of old, of ancient past, books of antiquities. There's a familiar story about David and Goliath. Before David and Goliath went to battle, David had presented himself to King Saul to say, I will take on this giant on behalf of the Israelites, and I will challenge him to war, and I will kill him. What I found fascinating about the story was the following. The first question that King Saul asked his wise counselors and the people around him was the following. Whose son is he? Before the battle and after the battle, same question. King Saul says, please inquire, whose son is he? Whose son is the young man? He is the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite. This was how things were done in the past. Because the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Now, because we've moved around and live in bigger cities, we can't ask the same questions. But it's important to understand that sometimes going deeper to understand what tree have you come from is always a useful way of understanding whether the person that's been brought forward will be the right selection. Now, I hope that's been useful.